Tokyo, in the year 2000, was a city standing at the intersection of deep historical tradition and relentless modern innovation. It was a sprawling metropolis of neon and concrete, a place where millions of lives intersected every single day. For young travelers from across the globe, the city represented the ultimate adventure. It offered a chance to experience a completely different culture, to explore vibrant neighborhoods, and to earn a lucrative income in the city's booming nightlife industry. But beneath the bright lights of districts like Roppongi, a complex underground economy operated, one that existed in a legal gray area and often left vulnerable foreign workers entirely unprotected. This is the story of a young woman who traveled across the world seeking independence, the unprecedented international investigation that followed her sudden disappearance, and the meticulous forensic work that finally unmasked a prolific and dangerous predator. Lucie Blackman was 21 years old, a former flight attendant from Kent, England. Those who knew her described her as bright, adventurous, and fiercely independent. Like many young people her age, she wanted to see the world. In May of 2000, Lucie and her close friend Louise Phillips made the decision to move to Tokyo. Their plan was to spend a year living in Japan, exploring the culture, and earning money to fund further travels. To do this, they entered the country on 90-day tourist visas and found employment in the Roppongi district, working as hostesses at a high-end establishment known as Club Casablanca. To understand the context of this case, it is essential to understand the hostess industry in Japan. It is a legally recognized and culturally established form of entertainment where women are employed to pour drinks, light cigarettes, and engage in lighthearted conversation with male clientele, usually wealthy businessmen. The role is strictly focused on hospitality and companionship within the confines of the club. However, there is an industry practice known as a dohan, which translates to a paid date. Hostesses are strongly encouraged, and sometimes required by their employers, to meet with clients outside of working hours for dinners or shopping trips. The client pays a premium to the club for this privilege, and the hostess receives a commission. While these dates are intended to be strictly platonic, they inherently place young women in isolated, unregulated situations with men they barely know. Furthermore, because many foreign hostesses, including Lucie, were working on tourist visas, they were technically in the country illegally. This created a profound vulnerability. If a hostess encountered trouble, she might hesitate to contact the authorities for fear of deportation. On the afternoon of July 1st, 2000, Lucie Blackman prepared for a dohan. She had arranged to meet a customer she had previously interacted with at Club Casablanca. She told her friend Louise that she was going out for the afternoon and promised to return later. Lucie left their shared apartment, stepped out into the bustling Tokyo streets, and vanished. When evening turned to night, and night turned to morning, Louise Phillips knew something was terribly wrong. Lucie was responsible and communicative. It was entirely out of character for her to disappear without checking in. The situation escalated from concerning to deeply alarming the following day when Louise received a bizarre phone call. The caller was a man who identified himself as Akira Takagi. He spoke in a cold, detached manner, claiming that Lucie had decided to join a religious cult and would never be returning. He instructed Louise not to look for her. This phone call was a crucial piece of psychological manipulation. In the context of Japan in the year 2000, the concept of a dangerous religious cult was not an abstract fear. Just 5 years earlier, the Shinrikyo cult had carried out a devastating sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway system. The memory of that event was still fresh in the public consciousness. The caller was seemingly attempting to exploit this cultural trauma to create a plausible, though terrifying, narrative for Lucie's disappearance, hoping to derail any immediate missing persons investigation. Louise immediately contacted the local police. However, the initial response from law enforcement highlighted a significant hurdle in missing persons cases, particularly involving foreign nationals. Statistically, the vast majority of adults who are reported missing have left of their own volition. In the context of the Roppongi nightlife district, it was not entirely uncommon for foreign workers who had overstayed their visas to suddenly relocate or leave the country without notifying anyone. The Japanese authorities initially treated the case as a routine runaway situation, but Lucie's family in the United Kingdom knew better. When Tim Blackman, Lucie's father, received the news that his daughter was missing, he immediately flew to Tokyo. What followed was one of the most extensive and high-profile public awareness campaigns in Japanese history. The Blackman family refused to let Lucie's disappearance be quietly filed away. They held daily press conferences, distributed tens of thousands of missing person flyers across the city, and offered a substantial financial reward for any information leading to her whereabouts. The family's relentless advocacy fundamentally shifted the trajectory of the case. They managed to elevate a local missing persons report into an international diplomatic incident. British media outlets descended on Tokyo, broadcasting the story globally. The pressure reached the highest levels of government, with then British Prime Minister Tony Blair directly addressing the matter with Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihiro Mori during a diplomatic summit. This unprecedented international scrutiny forced the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department to reevaluate their stance. The case was no longer a simple runaway inquiry. It was classified as a major criminal investigation, and a massive task force was assembled, dedicating vast resources to finding Lucie Blackman. The investigation required a meticulous reconstruction of Lucie's final known movements. Detectives began by securing the phone records from Lucie's apartment and her mobile device. They traced the origins of the bizarre phone call made by the man calling himself Akira Takagi. They also focused heavily on Club Casablanca, interviewing staff, management, and clientele. The objective was to identify the customer Lucie had arranged to meet on July 1st. This process was incredibly difficult due to the secretive nature of the hostess industry. Clients often used cash to avoid paper trails and provided false names to maintain their privacy. Despite these obstacles, investigators began to uncover a pattern of disturbing rumors within the Roppongi district. Other hostesses came forward with chilling accounts of a wealthy, regular customer who had a reputation for exhibiting highly concerning behavior. Several women reported having gone on Dohan dates with this individual, only to experience sudden, unexplained memory loss, waking up hours later feeling disoriented and unwell. These reports pointed toward the systematic use of incapacitating substances. Through painstaking detective work, analyzing credit card receipts, cell phone tower data, and witness descriptions, the police zeroed in on a suspect. His name was Joji Obara. Joji Obara was not a typical criminal. He was a highly educated, immensely wealthy property developer who had inherited a vast fortune. He owned multiple luxury properties across Japan, drove expensive imported cars, and presented himself as a sophisticated businessman. However, behind this facade of wealth and respectability lay a deeply disturbed individual who utilized his financial resources to insulate himself from the consequences of his actions. Obara was meticulous, organized, and operated with a terrifying level of calculation. When investigators began looking into Obara's background, they discovered a history of troubling incidents. He frequently used aliases, including the name Akira Takagi, the exact name used by the caller who had contacted Louise Phillips. Law enforcement realized they were not just looking for a man who might have information about Lucie Blackman. They were dealing with a highly organized predator. In October of 2000, 3 months after Lucie disappeared, police executed search warrants on multiple properties owned by Joji Obara. What they discovered during these raids would transform the case and expose a staggering scale of criminality. While they did not immediately find Lucie, they uncovered a massive archive of evidence that detailed Obara's methodology. Investigators found hundreds of meticulously cataloged videotapes. Upon reviewing these tapes, law enforcement officials were confronted with horrific evidence. The footage documented Obara systematically administering incapacitating drugs to numerous unconscious women and subsequently assaulting them. The logistical challenge facing the police was immense. They had to review every single tape, attempt to identify the women in the footage, and locate them to determine if they had survived their encounters with Obara. Many of the victims were entirely unaware that they had been assaulted, believing they had simply consumed too much alcohol and passed out. Among the vast array of evidence recovered from Obara's properties, forensic teams made a critical discovery. They found receipts for the purchase of large quantities of chloroform. Chloroform is a powerful central nervous system depressant that was historically used as an anesthetic. However, its use in medicine was largely abandoned due to its high toxicity and the very narrow margin between a dose that causes unconsciousness and a dose that causes fatal respiratory or hepatic failure. The presence of chloroform provided a clinical explanation for the sudden memory loss and severe disorientation reported by the hostesses in Roppongi. As the investigation into Obara's past deepened, detectives uncovered another tragedy that established his lethal pattern. In 1992, an Australian woman named Carita Ridgway had been working as a hostess in Tokyo. She had gone on a date with a man who called himself Nishita, an alias later linked to Obara. Following that date, Carita was admitted to a hospital in a state of profound distress. She rapidly developed severe liver failure and tragically passed away. At the time, her death was a medical mystery. However, years later, armed with the new evidence of Obara's methods, investigators re-examined Caritas' medical records. Toxicological analysis confirmed that the specific type of hepatic necrosis she suffered was entirely consistent with acute chloroform poisoning. Joji Obara was officially linked to a prior fatality. Despite this overwhelming evidence of his predatory behavior, Obara steadfastly refused to cooperate with the police regarding Lucie Blackman. He maintained complete silence during interrogations, relying on his legal team to shield him. The physical location of Lucie's whereabouts remained a mystery, and the Blackman family continued to endure the agonizing psychological torture of ambiguous loss. The breakthrough in the search for Lucie came months later. In February of 2001, investigators focused their attention on a coastal property owned by Obara on the Miura Peninsula, located south of Tokyo. This area featured a rugged coastline with numerous natural caves. Recognizing the possibility that Obara may have utilized the terrain to conceal evidence, law enforcement deployed highly specialized search teams. They utilized ground-penetrating radar, a geophysical method that uses radar pulses to image the subsurface, detecting anomalies in the soil that might indicate a burial site. They also brought in specialized forensic detection dogs trained to identify the specific chemical compounds associated with human remains. The search was exhaustive, battling harsh winter weather and difficult terrain. Finally, within a dark, secluded seaside cave situated just a few hundred yards from Obara's property, the search teams made a tragic discovery. They located human remains that had been subjected to extreme measures of concealment. The perpetrator had gone to great lengths to prevent the identification of the victim, dismembering the remains and encasing portions in concrete. The recovery process was conducted with the utmost clinical precision and respect. Forensic anthropologists and crime scene investigators worked meticulously to excavate the site, ensuring that every microscopic piece of physical evidence was preserved. The remains were transported to a secure forensic laboratory, where pathologists began the arduous process of identification. Due to the condition of the remains, visual identification was impossible. Investigators relied on dental records provided by Lucie's family in the United Kingdom. Dental morphology, the unique shape and structure of an individual's teeth, serves as a highly reliable method of identification. Furthermore, forensic geneticists extracted DNA from the recovered bone tissue, comparing the genetic markers to a DNA sample provided by Lucie's parents. The scientific results were conclusive. The remains found in the seaside cave were positively identified as Lucie Blackman. The discovery of Lucie's remains shifted the legal proceedings from a missing persons inquiry to a homicide investigation. However, Securing a murder conviction against Joji Obara proved to be an incredibly complex legal battle, highlighting the intricate and sometimes frustrating realities of the judicial system. In the Japanese legal system, the burden of proof rests heavily on the prosecution to establish not only that the defendant committed the act, but to scientifically prove the exact cause of death. Because Lucie's remains had been exposed to the elements for over 7 months and had been subjected to extensive post-mortem destruction, forensic pathologists were unable to determine the precise medical cause of her death. They could not definitively state whether she had died from an overdose of chloroform, physical trauma, or another mechanism. When the trial commenced, the prosecution presented a mountain of circumstantial evidence. They demonstrated Obara's history of drugging women, his use of the Akira Takagi alias, his purchase of chloroform, and the irrefutable fact that Lucie's remains were concealed mere steps from his property. They presented the horrific videotapes establishing his modus operandi. Obara's defense strategy was built on denial and the exploitation of legal technicalities. He claimed that he had met Lucie, but insisted she had left his company voluntarily. His legal team argued that the prosecution could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Obara had caused her death, suggesting that she could have succumbed to an accidental overdose of recreational drugs, and that Obara, panicking to protect his reputation, merely disposed of the remains. The trial lasted for years, a grueling ordeal for the Blackman family, who had to travel back and forth from the United Kingdom to Tokyo, enduring the emotional toll of the protracted legal process. In April of 2007, the Tokyo District Court delivered a verdict that sent shockwaves around the world. Joji Obara was found guilty of multiple counts of assault against other women, and he was convicted in the death of Karita Ridgway. For these crimes, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, citing the lack of direct physical evidence linking him to the precise cause of Lucie's death, the presiding judge acquitted Joji Obara of the charges related to Lucie Blackman. The acquittal was met with international outrage and profound devastation from Lucie's family. It seemed that Obara's meticulous efforts to destroy evidence had successfully exploited a loophole in the legal requirement for determining the cause of death. However, the pursuit of justice did not end there. The Japanese legal system allows the prosecution to appeal an acquittal. The prosecutors immediately filed an appeal with the Tokyo High Court. They argued that the lower court had placed an unreasonable burden on the medical evidence while ignoring the overwhelming weight of the circumstantial evidence. They emphasized that Obara's established pattern of behavior, combined with his undisputed connection to the location where the remains were found, formed an unbreakable chain of logic pointing solely to his guilt. In December of 2008, more than 8 years after Lucie Blackman vanished from the streets of Roppongi, the Tokyo High Court delivered its judgment. The appellate judges overturned the lower court's decision. They ruled that the circumstantial evidence was, in fact, sufficient to prove that Obara was responsible for Lucie's fate. While they still could not legally convict him of premeditated murder due to the ambiguous cause of death, the High Court found Joji Obara guilty of abduction, dismemberment, and the disposal of Lucie Blackman's body. The court upheld his life sentence, ensuring that he would remain incarcerated for the rest of his natural life. The resolution of the Lucie Blackman case left a lasting legacy on both Japan and the international community. It forced a critical reevaluation of the vulnerabilities faced by foreign workers in the Japanese nightlife industry. In the years following the case, law enforcement agencies implemented stricter regulations regarding the employment of hostesses and improved their protocols for handling reports of missing foreign nationals, recognizing that early intervention is critical in preventing tragedies. The case also stands as a testament to the evolution of forensic science and the power of international cooperation. The utilization of ground-penetrating radar, advanced DNA extraction techniques, and complex toxicological analysis were instrumental in dismantling the defenses of a highly organized predator. Without these scientific tools, Obara's crimes might have remained hidden in the shadows forever. For the Blackman family, the conclusion of the legal proceedings offered a measure of accountability, but it could never erase the profound tragedy of their loss. They had faced unimaginable grief with remarkable dignity, transforming their personal nightmare into a global campaign for awareness. Their relentless determination ensured that Lucie was not forgotten, and their efforts ultimately prevented a serial predator from claiming further victims. The story of Lucie Blackman is a sobering reminder of the unseen dangers that can exist even in the most vibrant and seemingly safe cities. It highlights the critical importance of situational awareness, the necessity of robust legal protections for vulnerable workers, and the enduring power of a family's love in the pursuit of truth. When an individual utilizes wealth and influence to systematically exploit and harm others, relying on the silence of their victims to maintain their freedom, how can society better equip law enforcement to identify and dismantle these predatory patterns before another life is tragically lost?